Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity of joining this conference. I'm Dr. Wafaa Salah from the British University in Egypt, and I'm going to present my research about regulatory influence, corporate governance, and ESG transparency. Environment, as we know that the environmental, social, and governance disclosure has become a central issue in evaluating long-term sustainability for firms. And in emerging country, ESG reporting has traditionally been voluntary, inconsistent, which limit the transparency and comparability between firms. However, in Egypt, especially in Egypt, ESG disclosure was largely limited until the issuance of Financial Regulatory Authority Decree number 107 in 2021. For Egypt, Egypt has governmental code which mandates some disclosure regarding to governance. And this is before 2021. However, when it comes to environmental and social, no, the disclosure in even the listed companies was very, very limited. That when they issued the Financial Regulatory Authority, this regulatory number 107 make it obligatory for all listed firms with issued capital greater than 100 million to disclose their environmental, social, and governance. And it defines index. This index is composed of 16 KPIs to the environmental, 17 KPI to the social, and 13 KPI to the governance. So this study examined how regulatory intervention and internal corporate governance mechanism influence ESG disclosure. More precisely, I investigate the role of audit committee independence, the financial leverage, and moderating effect of regulatory intervention on the level of environmental, social, and governance disclosure. As we said, the problem is that in developing countries, ESG reporting is voluntary, and we have low protection for creditors, and we don't have mandatory disclosure. So this weak institution characterized by limited enforcement lead to low level of disclosure. Regulatory intervention has a potential to change firm disclosure behavior by strengthening compliance. And this is the objective of the regulatory intervention. However, the empirical evidence is still limited because this decree was issued in 2021 and get into effect in 2022. So we have limitation about the impact of this intervention. Understanding how regulation and governance mechanisms jointly influence the level of ESG in Egypt is essential for improving transparency, enhancing investor confidence, and strengthening accountability in emerging markets. This study provides these insights for regulators, policymakers, and firms seeking to improve sustainable reporting practices. This study it was based on several theories. The first one is the agency theory, which suggests that ESG disclosures suffer in emerging markets because of information asymmetry and managerial discretion. In this study, the audit committee independence is expected to improve monitoring and reduce management influence over reporting decision, which should lead to stronger environmental, social, social and governance transparency. Also, the leverage can create additional agency tensions between the shareholders and the creditors because creditors require more transparency to assess the risk. The second theory is the legitimacy theory, which is central to this paper because it explains why firm behavior change after regulatory reform. And the final one is the shareholder theory, which broadened the argument beyond the stakeholders, the shareholders. And this is the framework of the study where I studied the audit committee independence percentage over the level of ESG disclosure and the leverage over the ESG disclosure and the moderating effect of regulatory intervention. My sample was 53 Egyptian listed non-financial firms. I have 318 firm year observations, firms listed on the EGX 100, because these are the firms that are required to make the disclosure. And I have 7 sectors in my study. The study span from 2019 to 2024, 3 years before the regulation and 3 years after the regulations. The main study model was the random effect model because I have panel data, and the decision was based on Houseman and Lagrange multiplier test. And in the robustness, I applied the OLS and fixed effect model. And to address the indigeneity, I have two SLS. Okay, and again, I ran the model with selecting subsample to see whether the result will change or not. This is a descriptive. We can see that still the level of disclosure is low. However, because this is the average for 6 years, so I will clarify it in the next slide. And the change in the level of disclosure is much higher between the firms rather than within the same firm within different years. Most of the companies has nearly 50% of the audit committee are independent. When it comes to the level of ESG disclosure, as you can see, this 3 years was before the issuing of the mandatory disclosure. So the level of environmental, social, and governance disclosure is very low, and it is much lower in 2020. And this may be due to the coronavirus that happened in 2020, which affect the disclosure, of course. Then after the decree, we can see that there is a sharp increase. Every year there is improvement in the level of disclosure, which means that the regulatory intervention may enhance the transparency in reports. And this, of course, protect the investors and creditors. When it comes to the correlation, we can find that audit committee independence positively affect environmental, social, and governance. Leverage is yes, although the regression show different results, okay? But what I can see from this correlation that I don't have multicollinearity problem because all the correlation coefficient is below the threshold 0.8. From the regression result, this is the random effect model. In the first model, I introduced the dependent variable and the control variable. And in the second model for the random effect model, I introduced the moderator. So the moderator was introduced later on, okay? And these two models for robustness. As we can see that H1, the first hypothesis, the first hypothesis, independent audit committee positively affects the level of ESG disclosure. We can see that it is highly significant in all the models, whether the main model or the robustness. And this means that H1 is supported and there is a significant effect of independent audit committee on the level of ESG disclosure. This means that firms with more independent audit committee disclose higher level of information, and this align with the agency and stakeholders theory, as these committees mitigate the managerial bias and increase accountability. When it comes to the second hypothesis, the effect of leverage, we can see that the leverage was not effect was not if affect does not affect the level of ESG disclosure in model 1, model 2, and also in the robustness model for the fixed effect model. And this suggests that internal financial constraints do not directly impact the level of ESG. And let me tell you that this may be true in emerging economies or developing economies, because we credit to rights and low ESG integration in lending explain the result. Because you know that Leverage as a standalone driver of transparency in developing countries is not true. Okay. The real insight come from the third hypothesis, where Decree 107 moderate the relationship between leverage and ESG disclosure. We can find that this is positive. This means that regulation has a power, as we can see, and explain the moderation effect. This is before Decree 107, and this is after issuing the decree. I think that I'm going out of time. I finished my 10 minutes or what? Okay. I have to stop sharing. طب as a conclusion, the result shows that both governance mechanism and regulatory reform are essential for improving ESG transparency, while leverage alone is not a predictor. However, regulations make highly financially constrained firms to disclose more information and become more transparent. I have to stop my screen. I'm sorry, but stop share.